Galatians 5:14. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Simple verse, yet so complicated to apply. It is so simple, like love your neighbor as yourself, just we get it, But we can see like this world is not operating under that law. Shootings and killings and murders and hunger and wars all over the world. If we just have this, and everybody have this in their hearts, and we practice this, it will look different. So welcome to the sermon, Under My Laws. And I think that's part of like the issue in the world, is that we're living under my laws. Under the laws that we determine that are good and not good, instead of living under the laws of God. Last Sunday we were discovering how and why Paul came to chapter 5, verse 14, and he said, for the entire law is fulfilled in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. So we started reflecting and talking about that. We went in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Galatians, and we were like trying to learn how can we love our neighbor, and how can we apply that into our lives. The last verse that we read last Sunday, it was chapter 2, verse 14, and it says, when I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, you are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? And we were reflecting about that question and putting that question in perspective, in a personal perspective, because I think there's some detachment, some disconnection between that reality and us. But then we were thinking about, we're Christians, but sometimes we don't live like Christians, but yet we want other people to live like Christians, and it doesn't make sense. And the conversation keeps going, Now we're going to read in verse 15 and 16, and Paul will say, you and I, so this is Paul to Peter, you and I are Jews by birth, not sinners like the Gentiles. Yet we know that a person is made right with God by faith in Jesus Christ, not by obeying the law. And we have believed in Christ Jesus so that we might be made right with God because of our faith in Christ, not because we have obeyed the law. For no one will ever be made right with God by obeying the law. It's interesting that the distinction that he makes in the beginning. You and I are Jews, not sinners like the Gentiles. And I think he's not trying to call the Gentiles sinners, but that was like the understanding back then. There's like this group of people that are the people that are called by God, and then the rest of the world that are sinners. And he's saying, you and I are Jews, but we're not like them, And I don't know if you have been in that position where you were at some point thinking that you are like something, but you're not like them. There's not like a song that says like that. They're not like us. Something like that, They're not like us. I know you don't know about that. I don't know about the song. It's okay. It's cool. All cool. But it's that idea, It's like we are not like them. I am not like them. I am not a sinner like them. And in the process, we get involved in a situation that is not acceptable. But there's this distinction, And he says, you and I are Jews. So we understand something. That we're obeying the law, but we know that a person is made right by faith and not by obeying the law. And we know that. Why are you acting like that, Peter? You and I are Jews. You know that from the law, there's no reason for us to determine that from the law we can make righteous ourselves. But we're only righteous by faith in Christ. By faith, we're only made righteous. Why are you acting like that, Peter? And I don't think the problem here is that he's obeying the law. Because at that point in life, they were actually they were obeying the law, basically. They were doing most of the law commandments. And the issue was that they were facing Gentiles and bringing Gentiles into the church of God. And then that was the meeting that they had in Jerusalem. And they were like, okay, we're not going to ask them to do these things. But it doesn't mean that they were not doing them. The problem is not that they were doing things that were in the law. The problem, I think, is that he was thinking that he was righteous because of the law. He was thinking that he was righteous because of what he was doing, because of his actions, because he was part of the law. And then he was separating people from himself because he was thinking that he was better than everybody else. So he was discriminating others in the process and asking others to do the same. And that's what Paul cannot tolerate. The problem in this case is your hypocrisy. That's what Paul told him. Your hypocrisy, what you're doing, it's what's wrong. And the problem also is that you're setting people aside from Jesus. And that is the problem over here. The problem was not you're doing things that are written in the law. At that point, I guess, and I assume, Paul was also doing some things that were written in the law. That was not the issue. But the issue was his hypocrisy in that he was bringing other people with him. I was having dinner this week with the Cars, and Mrs. Gale told me, Danny, you normally say during the sermons, I think. And I thought about, and I actually have written down in my outline, I think. So now I'm going to say, now I think, that's number one. Now I think when we read these things, we disconnect ourselves. Like I have been saying, So we don't obey the law. We didn't grow up as a Jew. We don't have that culture. We don't have those issues. So it's like, okay, so we're cool, Anybody here practice anything of the law? Anybody is circumcised? Anybody want to, do that kind of things? Maybe no. So we're like, okay, so we're cool, That was Peter. Oh, Peter, how can you do that, How is it possible that you acted like that after you were with Jesus? After you walk with Jesus? How is it possible that you are acting like that? And we became another Paul in this situation. You, Peter, So we disconnect ourselves because we don't practice the law of Moses. But let me put it in this way. I think what happens and the way we can put this in a practical way in our life, in the present, is that we don't practice the law of Moses, but we practice our own laws. We have our own laws established. Sometimes those laws are personal. Sometimes those laws are household laws. And sometimes we were inherited those laws because my parents, because my grandparents, because I inherited those laws. Sometimes I created those laws, based on the situation. I was talking with another minister the other day, and we were having a nice conversation, and he told me that when he was growing up, his dad told him, if a person hits you, you don't do anything. If a person hits you twice, you don't do anything. But if a person hits you 3 times, then you respond. That was like a law. And he grew up in that law, And I was thinking, how many times do we have that kind of laws in our lives? I'm going to tolerate this. I'm going to tolerate that. But I'm not going to tolerate this. It doesn't matter if it's under God's law. It's just the way that I have, the way that I live. Because maybe my dad taught me. I was thinking in my past when I was growing up, there was this invisible and yet so bold law in my house that my dad said, in this house, we do what I say. In this house, what I say is done. And in this way. It wasn't like, hey, let's talk about this. No, it was like, in this house, we're going to do what I say. And that was the law. Whatever he said, we have to do it. And that was the law in that house. And I grew up with that law. And I experienced everything based on that law. I interpret life based on that law. And I wonder how many of those kind of situations do you have in your personal life? How many of those laws that you have inherited from someone else? Maybe your parents, maybe your guardians, maybe your teachers, maybe what you've experienced, maybe the people that you're surrounded by, maybe your group of friends, because they say, we're going to tolerate this and we're not going to tolerate this, and you follow those laws, Or maybe, I wonder how many of those laws actually you have created, Like you didn't inherit that, or at least not consciously, but you have created those kind of laws in your house. In this house, what I say is going to be done. In this house, what I determine is what we're going to do, And we establish those laws. Actually, and I don't think in the first place, I don't think those laws are because we want to do wrong or we want to do mean things. It's because we set those laws, or my parents or somebody else set those laws in order to survive, in order to live life. Like you can tolerate 2 people hitting you, but not 3. I wonder what would happen if he said 4 and not 5, or 1 and not 2. I don't know. It would be a different life. But it was just the way he thought, and I assume his dad was also taught that. Maybe because of his father said that to him, or maybe because at some point he tolerated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he said, this is not working. So I'm going to teach my son to tolerate just 2, but not 3. And we create those laws, and they became part of ourselves, that we hold to them. And then we read this verse and we were like, we don't practice the law. That's okay. Let's read another verse, But we have our own laws. We don't live under the law of Moses, but maybe we live like, in this house, we're going to do this. In this house, we tolerate this, but we don't tolerate this. In this house, we love these people or these things, but we don't love these things. In this house, we do things in this particular way, but we don't do things in this particular way. Am I like talking about things that don't happen here in California? This is just in Colombia? Is that Hispanic culture? In this house, in this house, in this house. And I wonder how long have we been living in that situation of, in this house, we do things in this way. Whether they were good for us, whether they were making us survive and live and thrive in life, whether they were hurting us at some level or at some point. But I wonder how many houses in this place are living under, in this house, we do this. And sometimes they are not based on God's laws. They're just based on like 1, 2, not 3. And you don't have a scripture that says that. There's no based argument on that, Or in this house we do it this way. I can ask my dad, show me the verse. There's no way. Maybe I am the head of the household. Yes, but Christ is the head of everything, So the problem is not that we have personal laws, because sometimes they help us survive. Sometimes they help us live. They help us interact with people, And there may be like a line, like a fine line between laws and boundaries, because boundaries are something different, I think so. My dad wasn't created a boundary. My dad was creating a law, The boundaries maybe, if I say something, you need to respect that. But if you disagree, maybe let's have a conversation. That may be a boundary. But it's like, if in this house we do it this way, it's like, I don't care what you think or what you say. I'm going to do it my way. That's not a boundary. He was actually crossing my boundaries that I didn't have at that point, And I wonder, how do we get to this world? Do we get to this world that is so crazy? And killings and hunger and things that are happening. Like things happened this week. But those things are happening the week before and a month, last year, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and they're probably gonna keep happening as long as we keep living under my laws, because this is what is right. And that was what Peter was thinking, So the problem is not that we have laws. The problem is when those laws are above God's love, are above what God wants you to have in your household, in your life. The problem is when those laws are above Jesus Christ and His love for us. And the problem is when we think that because we have those laws, we are more righteous than the other people. We think that we are better than the other people because we do it this way in this house. Like they don't tolerate just one people. If a person hits that person, the kid in that house, the kid will come back. Here we do it twice, and then 3 times. So we think we're better than that. In this house we do things in this way, so we're better than the other houses. That's when the problem comes in, because we think we're better than the other. And I think that's the situation that is happening here right now. The problem is not that he is obeying the law. The problem is that he, in accordance to the law and obeying the law, he's discriminating people. He's acting in one way in front of one people because he wants to align with these laws, but then he's discriminating this group of people. And sometimes we act like that. We don't act like, in this house we do these things, but when we're with my group of friends, I act in a different way. I act in the laws that are established by my group of friends. Then I go to the house and I live under those laws. And I go to the church and I live under the church, And I just try to live different multiple laws in my life because there is no one that is covering myself. And then I became a hypocrite, which is the problem that I think it's happening with Peter. And we discriminate people in the process. And that's why Paul doesn't like the situation. That's why Paul said, I need to address this right now. Because something is wrong. Second time, Mrs. Gale. I have it written down. And I wonder what could happen if instead of like in my household, we're going to do things this way, my dad would have said, in this house, we're going to love the way Jesus loved. I don't even know how my life would have been. How would have been the interaction between my dad and I, and my sisters, my dad and my mom, us as a family towards other people, us as an example to other people. In this house, we're going to love the way Jesus loved. But the problem is that if I say that as the head household, I think that I'm losing control of the situation. I think that I'm losing myself in the situation because I don't have control over it. Because then the reference is not going to be in my laws, in the way I say things, in the way I interpret things. It's going to be Jesus, And that's crazy. How am I going to follow Jesus instead of my laws? In this house, we're going to do it this way. How can I do that? I lose control. I lose, determining what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. Because maybe if I do it that way, then she's not going to be respected. He's not going to be respected, If he goes and try to be like Jesus, people are going to bully him. People are like if the world is better because we have established our own laws. Like if this world is in peace and love and everything is just better because each us individually have established that we're going to tolerate this and not tolerate this. That we're going to do things this way and we're not going to do things this way. Like if this world is better because Danny says we're going to do things this way. Like if I can make it better at some point by saying we're going to do things in this church this way because I am the city minister. Like if that can change and make something different and make it better than if we say, let's follow the way Jesus did. But we lose control, and we get in a moment of fear, in a moment of like. So I wonder what would happen if my dad would have said that, and he started practicing that, and he started teaching us what you're doing. How are you acting? Is that the way Jesus did? I don't know that. Teach me. Okay, let me teach you. Is the way you're treating your mom? Is the way Jesus would love you to treat your mom? I don't know that. Let's go and read the Bible. Whew. That sounds like too religiously, like a sect, like people that do creepy things. They're so spiritual, so holy, Well, let's just keep living under our laws. And I think we're going to see the same generations and generations and generations to come. Because we have been doing it. They were doing it. And Jesus was just like, with them, walking with them. They saw the miracles. They saw everything. Sometimes we lack faith because we were not there. They were with him. Peter was with him. Peter saw everything, the whole process. Yet he is here dealing with his inherited loss. Verse 19 through 21. For when I tried to keep the law, it condemned me. So I died to the law. I stopped trying to meet all its requirements so that I might live for God. My old self has been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not treat the grace of God as meaningless. For if keeping the law could make us right with God, then there was no need for Christ to die. For if keeping the law could make us right, there was no need for Christ to die. For if keeping the law, my laws, my dad's laws, this president's laws, this group of people's laws, this church laws, could make us right, there was no need for Christ to die, guys. If by keeping your own laws and the way you established them and the way they have operated in your life could make you right, there was no need for Christ to die. But Christ died on the cross so that we don't have to longer live under those laws that are actually not working. And maybe you can say, yes, but I'm here because of those laws. Yeah, but at what cost? Or do you think you are so righteous and perfect and unique that actually those laws have made you the person who you are and you're so proud about it, For if keeping my laws, there's no need for Christ to die. And then Paul would say, when I try to keep the law, it condemned me. And I think it's what happens when we keep following our laws or the laws that we inherit. We just keep condemning us. Because we just get involved in that cycle of what if I start living my life now saying to Princess and Baby Ellie and Baby, in this house we're going to do what I say, And then I'm going to start teaching that to Baby Ellie, When you get there, you're going to do your things. Well, you're a girl or whatever, I don't know. In this house, you're going to do it, and you have to do it like that. In your school, when you go there, you need to say it like that, But it's just condemning us. It's just getting us in the same cycle, in the same darkness that we're living. When I try to keep them, it condemned me. So Paul says, so I died to the law. I stopped trying to meet its requirements. And even if you think about it, I know, what if I start doing things in another way? It's scary. I have been living this way for so many years that what if I start living the way Jesus wants us to live? What if people don't respect me? What if my wife doesn't respect me? What if the kids doesn't respect me? Well, that's the consequence of what you have created in the first place. But what if it doesn't happen? What if you experience the love of God in a different way? What if you experience the protection of God in a different way? What if you experience the love and the mercy and the grace of God in a different way? What if something different happens in a good way? And it's interesting, these kind of questions, because we're talking about Jesus comparing to us, and yet we're still doubting about His efficiency in our lives, His power in our lives. Love the way Jesus loved, it was different times. Oh no, it was the same thing. It was all crazy. He was actually killed by doing that. So that I might live for God. Because if we keep holding on to those laws, if we keep holding on to them, we're going to live for those laws. We're going to live for those things that we inherited. We're going to live based on what I think is right and what I think is not right. We're going to just be attached to that. But if we die to those laws, I might live for God. Because trying to meet the requirements of the law of Moses and my laws are just taking me away from Jesus. They are not letting me live for God. But I'm just living for my past, for my parents' recommendations and those things. And I'm just using my example. I'm not saying that my dad was around that, because I don't think he was like trying to do something wrong in my life, But I'm just thinking in general, I do that in my household as well. Sometimes I try to establish things in one way and they don't work. But I live, and what happens when we get stuck in those situations, those environments, that I live under those laws, I live, instead of living for God, I start living for pleasing other people, for pleasing my family, for pleasing my dad. Because if I do it in a different way, then my dad is not going to like it. If I do it this way, my dad is not going to like it. Princess said that one morning she was having breakfast in Colombia this year that she went, and she was having breakfast with water, which is something that we sometimes do. And my dad was like, "Why are you drinking water in the morning?" It's like, come on. Because you still think that we in this house. You know? And just those little things creates things in your brain. I still has those things in my mind. You know? And I can no longer, and I know I don't live for Christ, but I live to please people. I do these things because my dad is going to get pissed. Because my mom is not going to like it. Because if I act in this way, then Ellie's not going to respect me. If I love just everybody, then Ellie's not going to understand that she needs to create boundaries. And then she needs to do these things. Again, thinking that my ways are better than Jesus' ways. But my old self has been crucified, Paul says. No longer I live, but Christ lived in me. Instead of trusting in my old laws, I can live for God. I can live trusting in the Son of God. Because He loved me, that's what Paul said, and He gave Himself for me. So it's not a love out of like nothing. It's because He actually did something for you and for me that was so big and great that we cannot even comprehend. And Paul is like, we can disconnect ourselves and cut those ties with those things, die to that past, and start living trusting in the Son of God because He loved you so much and because He died for you on the cross. He actually did something for you so big, and now He's asking you to do something because He loved me and died for me. Why this phrase is so important? Because I think, and we're going to talk about this coming Sunday, so you need to be here this coming Sunday, because the laws that we have normally are based on fear. Like, and that's what I think. We establish those laws because they are based on fear. So I need to establish this because I may lose control, because I may lose respect, I may lose something in here. So I established in this way. So we're going to do things in this way in this house out of fear, out of what could happen if I don't do it this way. What if we love people the way Jesus did it? What could happen? The world doesn't respond to that in a good way. What could happen? So it's just based on fear. But the verse says, because He loved me and He died for me. So the love of Jesus is based on love. For God so loved the world. It wasn't because He was so afraid and scared of this world that the world was going to destroy themselves and they were going to just employ it. It wasn't based on fear. It was based on love. For God so loved the world that He sent. But I wonder how many decisions do we do based on, because I love so much this family, I'm going to do this in this way. Because I love so much this person, I'm going to talk to that person in this way. Because I love so much this community, I'm going to talk and live to this community in this way. Instead of based on fear. I cannot say things in that place. Because what if they don't like it? What if I get fired? What if something happens? And we keep living under fear. But the love of Jesus is based on love. He loved me first. That's why He's asking me to love others. He loved me in the world, and that's why He's asking me to love myself. He loved me, so that's why He's asking me to love Him. But maybe, like Peter, we want to keep those laws, that maybe have been working for a while, but now are condemning us. Now are just dragging us and taking us away from Jesus, leading us astray from the gospel of Jesus, and at the same time, we're bringing other people with us. And therefore, I cannot live for God. There is not a scenario that I picture that, because I have this so inherited to myself that I don't even know how it would look like to live in a different way. So I live in fear of what could happen, of what will people say. Until we listen to Paul's words. And we read them and they confront us. And then we can ask ourselves, what am I doing? How am I living? Why am I still following those laws if they don't work and actually they are condemning me? Why am I still living in that way? And I think that what we have left is this invitation from Paul that is in the verse. In verse 20, he will say, so I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And I think that's the invitation that we have. So that we can cut ties with those things in the past, with those situations, with those fears, with those traumas, with those things that are just condemning us and keeping us in the cycle of darkness and all that. And what we have is just this. Can we read this together? 1, 2, 3. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. God bless you.